Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many times as 7?" Jesus answered and said, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife and his children and all his property, in payment of the debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe me.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had him put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt and because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant as I had pity on you?' Then in anger his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you unless each of you forgives your brother from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord. This is an extremely frightening gospel passage because Jesus is very serious. Pun intended, as serious as a heart attack, as they would say, because he's talking about forgiveness of the heart. And the first insight you see here is he is calling the disciples fellow servants. In other words, we're all in this together. And when you consider that Jesus is called by the prophet Isaiah the suffering servant, then it's logical to include Jesus in the fellow servants. And so in other words, Jesus is saying to his disciples, I know what it is to forgive that much in my humanity. And there it is. And he is saying, you're my fellow servants, and I need you to go there with me to forgive that much if necessary. And this is not a gospel that's optional. So this is frightening. It begins by Peter, of all people, okay? He throws himself out there. He becomes the one who is going to ask the risky question for all the other disciples. So in a sense, he's taking his place as the leader. All right, if anything happens here, guys, I'm the one who's going to get thrown under the bus, but I will ask the question that you've all been dying to ask. How many times do we have to forgive? By simply asking the question, Peter reveals that forgiveness from the heart is not there for him yet. Because he's asking about how far can I go? When we're talking about from the heart, it means your heart is everything. Your heart is where everything happens. And that's the everything that he's talking about. You got to forgive from everything. And Peter's not there yet because he's already put a limit. Let me see, how many times? If I do it this many times, I'm all set? No. We got to talk about from the heart. And so that question reveals that he's not quite there yet. However, you continue here. This servant who couldn't forgive his debtor, who owed him much, much less, who is forgiven everything by his master, a huge debt that was impossible to repay. The whole debt is canceled. And it's canceled simply because he asks, and the master does it. This is so what's implied here is a fellow servant. Okay? I forgave you. You have to apply the same standard. His master handed him, when he didn't do this, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the debt. I want to recall a little further back in the gospel, in Matthew, in this gospel, chapter 7, Jesus says, the measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. The measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. Okay, what's the measure that he measured? This guy refused to forgive a small debt. On the other hand, the master refused him everything. And so now he is getting the measure that he applied to his fellow servant. I'm not forgiving you. And therefore the master applies that to him. It's also akin to what we say in the Lord's Prayer, and this is why the Lord's Prayer is very dangerous. Forgive us our debts as we forgive other debtors. Every time you say the Lord's Prayer, you are saying, God, forgive me the same way I forgive other people, including my worst enemy. Would you like an answer to that prayer? Because you're going to get it. Okay, now before you think there's no hope, okay? This is impossible to do without Jesus. Jesus is calling us to do something that we can only do when we're his fellow servants, when he is with us, when he loves with us, when he works with us, when he suffers with us, and when he hurts with us when someone offends us. In the Eucharistic prayer shortly, there's a line in it that says that it's a prayer to love one another through your Son. It's the prayer to the Father. It says that we're asking that we could love one another through the Son. In other words, by God's grace and what we receive by being united with him, we can do for others. This is impossible without him. Here's another little tidbit of hope, however. The heart not only represents the capacity of everything, okay? It's what I would be willing to do, giving all of myself. It's from my heart. Lovers present themselves to each other and say, you've got my whole heart. In other words, you've got all of me, okay? And this is what we're talking about. But in the midst of that, you've got all of me, is a deep desire. The reality is, I don't know if I can, honestly, I want to do that. I might have a hard time getting there, but that's what I really want to do. So now we're looking at a desire. And if that desire is there, it's going to be possible with the grace of Jesus Christ. Sometimes when I see people in confession, they say, I can't forgive that person. By rights, I should say for your penance, I want you to pray the Lord's Prayer. However, Sometimes the question is very helpful when I say, would you like to? And most of the time the answer is, yeah, I wish I could. There's the desire. That's the beginning of the openness to the greatness of the heart, which can finally be poured out with the grace of the mercy of Christ. What Jesus is asking is not impossible. It's only possible, however, with his grace and his mercy. And if someone has done us a great, great wrong, we look at Jesus and we see the great wrong that was done to him and that he loved nevertheless. And he looks at us from the cross and he says, my fellow servants. And my fellow servants means not only will you forgive like me, but will you join me in the glory of my cross and my resurrection?
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia, qui aquam meruisti porta